Eureka had transformed into a magical creature, a little squirrel. Her goal was to save a villainous boy from the shadows of his troubled childhood. However, the unexpected happened. The boy, who was known as John Hellard, appeared pure and innocent, was in fact cunning and manipulative. His acts of kindness were calculated, designed to ensure Eureka belonged to him alone. Eureka, having crossed into a romance novel, became the birthday gift for an 11-year-old boy, Tom Hellard. He was the heir of the Hellard family, known for producing the most powerful magician of the era. Yet the greater a magician's power, the more pain they suffered from the overwhelming magic within them. Divine beasts were the only beings capable of stabilizing such magic. To bolster her family's reputation, Mrs. Hellard purchased Eureka, now a divine beast, for an enormous sum. She wanted to prove that her son's magic was so potent, it required suppression by a mythical creature. In truth, Tom's magical abilities were minimal. He struggled to perform even basic spells, such as lighting a fire. To ensure Eureka wouldn't escape, she was branded as belonging to the Hellard family. Being a divine beast capable of understanding simple language, she pretended to obey to avoid being confined to a cage. However, she didn't anticipate Tom's disdain toward her, despite his earlier compliments about her cuteness. His mother reminded him that this was no ordinary animal, but a mythical beast, one that could become human if it absorbed enough magic. Tom, intrigued, began to scheme. If the divine beast could transform into a human, he reasoned, he would gain a new servant. Eureka, frustrated, thought, "With your lack of magic, there's no way I can become human." She resisted the urge to lash out, but understood the true dynamics of the Hellard family. In time, Tom might grow into a powerful magician, but for now, his abilities were negligible. Suddenly, news broke that the eldest heir in the magical tower had collapsed with a high fever. Mrs. Hellard, unperturbed, ordered the staff to let him rest and to cancel preparations for his meal that day. Despite the urgency of the situation, her tone remained cold and detached. The little squirrel couldn't help but notice the stepmother's cold and ruthless demeanor. Perhaps John's condition is even worse than mine, she thought. Determined to bring him some comfort, she decided to find something that might bring joy, even if it meant playing the role of a slave to Tom's whims. Since earlier that day, Tom had taken to calling her slave repeatedly, which annoyed her. She had her limits too. When he poked at her out of boredom and cursed before storming off, she felt a mix of relief and irritation. Late that night, after Tom finally fell asleep, she gathered leftover food rations and embarked on her first daring adventure. Luckily, as a squirrel, she was skilled at climbing. She made her way to the West Tower, where the eldest young master resided, said to be suffering terribly. Reaching the tower window, she knocked gently. Inside, the oldest son, John Hellard, lay in visible agony. He heard the noise and, surprised to see a squirrel waving at him, sat up in confusion. "A squirrel? What's it doing here? Do you want to come in?" he murmured as he opened the window carefully. Eureka, startled by his sudden movement, lost her balance and tumbled backward into the air. Before she could react, John lunged forward and caught her just in time. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. The near fall left her shaken, but as John held her, something remarkable happened. Through the brief contact, she felt a surge of energy, a yearning for power, and an overwhelming sense of pain. It was as though she could feel the torment he endured daily. Instinctively, she reached out, trying to calm the storm of magic within him. At the moment of contact, the violent energy in John's body came to a sudden halt. For the first time in what felt like forever, he no longer felt pain. His expression softened, his body relaxing as he looked at her in awe. "You're a divine beast, aren't you? But why are you here?" Realizing his mistake, he laughed awkwardly. "Oh, right. You're an animal. You can't answer me." Eureka found his fumbling attempt at conversation unexpectedly endearing. "He's kind of cute like this," she thought. Maybe it's because he's still young. He doesn't seem at all like the future villain he's meant to become. John Hellard, the boy she faced now, was destined to grow into the infamous villain of the novel. But in this moment, he was just a boy, vulnerable and kind in ways that contradicted the darkness he was said to harbor. John's mother, the former Duchess, passed away when he was still a child. After her death, the Duke of Hellard remarried, bringing Ella into their family. Together, they had a child of their own. Soon after, the Duke left for war, leaving John behind to face a lonely childhood. At the age of 10, John's latent magical abilities surfaced. But instead of bringing joy, they caused him great pain as the magic rampaged uncontrollably through his body. Ella, who wanted her own son to inherit the Duke's title, viewed John as an obstacle. Using his condition as an excuse, she confined him to the tower under the guise of treatment, effectively isolating him. Later, she sent him to the battlefield, where he was expected to serve the Empire. 5 years passed, and John emerged as a celebrated hero, having brought an end to the war. However, his return marked the beginning of his downfall. As a reward for his valor, the Emperor arranged for him to marry the most beautiful princess in the Empire. John fell in love with her at first sight, but the princess's heart already belonged to another. Unable to win her love, John's heartbreak consumed him, leading him down a dark path. The once kind and innocent boy became a ruthless villain, reshaping his pain into vengeance. Now, in his youth, John was still far from the villain he would one day become. Sitting in the tower, he clasped his fingers nervously. "When I meet you, I feel so much better. Can I touch you?" he asked the little squirrel hesitantly. The squirrel sighed internally, charmed by his genuine vulnerability. He was completely different from the manipulative personas she had encountered before. With her consent, John gently touched her fur, and a soft smile spread across his face. "I've been alone for so long," he admitted quietly. "This is the first time someone has been here for me when I felt so bad. Until just now, I was in pain and lonely. But with you here, the pain is gone, and so is the loneliness." John paused, his voice trembling with sincerity. "If I were born into an ordinary family, or better yet, if I had never been born, I wouldn't feel this way. But you've changed that. Thank you. For the first time, I'm not in pain, and I'm not alone." His bright, sunny smile stirred the little squirrel's protective instincts. No, she reminded herself. I'm here to absorb his magic power and return to being human. But looking at his hopeful expression, she couldn't help but feel a pang of pity. "Could you come again tomorrow?" John asked hesitantly. "You don't have to help me with my magic. Just be here with me." His careful request, filled with such gentle longing, made her heart ache. Afraid she might show too much emotion, the little squirrel nodded firmly. "You don't even have to ask," she thought. "Of course, I'll come every day." Eureka couldn't help but reflect on John's tragic future. He must have become a villain because he endured too much pain alone for too long. She wondered, if someone had cared for him back then, would he have turned out differently? Though she was only a squirrel for now, she resolved to treat him with kindness and do her best to protect the innocent, fragile child he still was. John surprised her. Gently picking her up, he stroked her fur in apology. "Starting tomorrow night, I'll leave the window open. You can come find me anytime," he said softly. Eureka left him with a cheerful goodbye, but as soon as she was out of sight, his smile vanished. His body still ached, and his thoughts turned dark. Is this the calming power of a divine beast? His expression grew somber as he whispered to himself, "Soon, the real beast will belong to me." Determined to speed up her transformation, Tom had scoured books about divine beasts. In one impulsive moment, he grabbed the squirrel-turned girl to confirm her gender. "Based on the pattern, you're female," he muttered in surprise. He frowned and added, "So, when you fully transform, you'll be a girl. I hope you'll be taller than me. It'll make it easier for me to boss you around." Eureka, annoyed by his behavior, swished her tail at him in defiance. "Really," she huffed, "if I become human, it won't have anything to do with you anymore. I'll ask John to remove the Hellard mark." Thinking of John, the kind boy from before, she felt certain he would help her. As long as she became human, she could take control of her own destiny. No more nuts, she thought with determination. His thoughts wandered. Why hasn't she come tonight? His heart sank, and his expression darkened. I should have acted more pitiful. Just as the idea crossed his mind, he heard soft footsteps approaching below. A small claw appeared at the window. It was his little squirrel back again. Eureka waved at him cheerfully, and John chuckled. "You came today." The little squirrel thought to herself, "This boy still looks so good today." Unbeknownst to her, John was already setting a plan in motion. "It must have been hard for you to climb all the way here. Was it dangerous? Come, take a break. I want you to feel comfortable," he said, his voice gentle. The little squirrel, lulled by his kind tone, was coaxed into a daze. Excitedly, she patted the pillow, signaling for him to come closer. "I'll even provide warm service for you," she seemed to say. John, surprised, asked, "You'll let me lie down?" At her insistent urging, he finally lay down as instructed. "You've given me so much," he said softly, "so I want to give you something in return, a name." He paused, realizing for the first time that the little squirrel didn't have a proper name. "That little bastard keeps calling you slave, doesn't he? That's unacceptable." Happy to finally receive a name, the little squirrel pressed her cheek against John's affectionately. "How about Paul? Don't you like it? Maybe Tim? Or Calvin?" he suggested, watching her expressions. Each time, the little squirrel's refusal was obvious, leaving him concerned. What if she doesn't like any of them? He worried, though he quickly moved on. "That's all I can think of for now," he said, his bright smile softening the squirrel's heart. "Fine, I'll spare you this time," she thought, slightly exasperated. Meanwhile, as John spoke, he continued to unconsciously release magic, which the squirrel eagerly absorbed. She managed to take in much more than she had the day before, feeling as though she was nearing her goal. Satisfied, she pulled back and thought, today's mission was a success. But just as she finished absorbing the magic, her body began to glow. Her small frame transformed. Tiny paws gave way to delicate hands, and her fur receded to reveal soft, curly brown hair. When John opened his eyes, he froze, his heart skipping a beat at the sight before him. Sitting in front of him was a cute girl with shimmering pink eyes. He bolted upright, his voice trembling. Who are you?" The little squirrel, equally panicked, stammered, "It's me." Realizing she could now speak, she looked down at herself in shock. Her small hands and youthful voice confirmed it. She had become human. Amazed by the transformation, John stared at Eureka in shock. Quickly he grabbed the sheet and wrapped her up like a cocoon. His usual cunning demeanor gave way to flustered stammering. When Eureka saw how flustered John was, she asked, "Did I scare you?" John's cheeks turned red and he lowered his head nervously. "Let me explain," Eureka added. Eureka tried to reassure him, explaining, "Divine beasts can become human." However, before she could finish her explanation, her form shimmered and reverted back into that of a squirrel. It turns out that absorbing a large amount of magic in a short period allows a temporary human transformation. But to become fully human, uninterrupted absorption of magic is required for a full 50 days. Any transformation attempted before that would result in the depletion of all the magic accumulated so far. Finally, understanding the rules of her transformation, the little squirrel felt frustrated. This is going to be a hassle, she thought. The next time Eureka visited John, she came prepared with a plan. She had brought a torn page from a book titled An Introduction to How Divine Beasts Become Human. "Since I can't explain it properly, I brought you this," she said, presenting it to him. Watching her proud expression, John immediately guessed the truth. "Did you tear this out of a book from the library?" he asked, his tone playful. Eureka hesitated but couldn't deny it. Amused, John smiled as she rubbed her face against him in a light-hearted gesture. "You're complimenting me, aren't you?" he teased. He then repeated what he had read. "So absorbing magic for 50 days straight will make you human?" 50 days. His voice trailed off as he thought aloud. Will I get to see her like that again? Without realizing it, he had spoken his thoughts out loud. Hearing his words, John panicked. "It's nothing," he replied quickly, but deep down, he found himself looking forward to seeing her again. John's life, however, was far from simple. On rainy days, his stepmother forced him outside under the pretense of curing him, leaving him soaked to the bone. His younger brother, meanwhile, treated tormenting him as a game, taking pleasure in abusing him for entertainment. Only the little squirrel, silently watching, truly understood the extent of his pain. John was tortured by his uncontrolled magic to the brink of death. Coupled with the abuse he endured daily, it was no wonder he would one day become a villain. As the little squirrel pondered ways to help him, Tom suddenly shoved him aside, saying, "I'll help treat my poor brother." But it was clear that Tom's intentions were anything but kind. He was simply looking for another opportunity to bully John. The squirrel resolved to act. "No, I have to save him." Determined, she gathered as many nuts as she could, even stuffing some into her cheeks, and hurried off. "Wait, I'll be there soon," she thought. John Hillard's stepmother saw him as a thorn in her side. She despised him, knowing he had inherited powerful magical energy. There wasn't a day she didn't wish to get rid of him. However, the Emperor's weakened authority after the Long War complicated matters. To maintain control, the Emperor required noble family heads to serve in the military. If a family head died in battle, the responsibility of leading the family would fall to their immediate heir. John's stepmother was determined to keep her own son from being sent to war, and saw John's demise as the solution. John, already in poor health, struggled to keep up with the demands placed on him. When he begged the maid for a moment to rest, she arrogantly refused and cruelly urged him to move faster. Watching this, the little squirrel's anger boiled over. How could she treat him like that when he's already in this state? She thought, enraged. Determined to help, the squirrel lifted a fruit and aimed carefully. You may not have anyone on your side, she thought, but now I'll fight by your side. With pinpoint accuracy, she pelted the maid with nuts, hitting her squarely in the eyes. Not a single shot missed. The startled maid stumbled and fell to John's feet, frantically searching for the source of the attack. John's gaze followed her movements until, sure enough, he spotted the little squirrel dancing triumphantly in the distance, as if urging him to leave quickly. Without hesitation, John turned and ran back toward the bell tower. Just as he reached safety, the roar of Tom echoed through the halls. I finally got the water! Where did he go? Furious, Tom confronted the maids, who trembled in fear. They stammered, trying to explain that they had lost track of John, but their excuses only fueled Tom's anger. He immediately began taking his frustration out on the maids, showing no mercy. Tom turned to Ella and said smugly, Mother, you rarely have such a good toy. And now these two have let it slip away. Ella frunció el ceño. Tom, how can you call your brother a toy? Weren't you supposed to help him with his treatment? I am helping him, Tom replied with mock innocence. Ella sonrió con calma. It's fine, Tom. There's no need to dwell on missing your brother today. Tomorrow we'll have a distinguished guest arriving. Wouldn't it be more fun to greet them with your brother? The mention of the guest caught the little squirrel's attention. The Mephistopheles family? She thought in surprise. That's the heroine of the novel. According to the original story, the two were not supposed to meet until after the war. Did my interference change the plot? Meanwhile, Tom continued scheming. Since John hadn't obediently accepted his bullying today, Tom resolved to humiliate him in front of the guests tomorrow. His cruel nature seemed to mirror his mother's perfectly. But then Ella casually added, "Make sure your brother brings the divine beast to display his magical talent. It will make an impression." Later that night, John returned to his room, enduring the relentless pain caused by his magic. Despite his exhaustion, he opened the window, hoping the little squirrel might appear. Though his initial intentions had been to use the divine beast's power to suppress his magic and eventually destroy the oppressive Duke's palace, his thoughts began to shift. When he learned that the little squirrel needed his magic to become human, he felt oddly fortunate. If she needs me to return to her human form, she'll keep coming back. In his mind, they were simply using each other. But as he reflected on how the little squirrel had stepped up to help him today, doubt crept into his thoughts. The squirrel appeared as if on cue, leaping onto his shoulder. "There you are," John said, his voice soft. "Thank you so much for today. Thanks to you, I didn't get caught in too much rain." The squirrel stretched out a tiny claw, gently comforting him. John smiled, the tension in his face easing slightly. "I'm okay," he murmured, rubbing his cheek lightly against the squirrel. "Can I trust you? You're the most important person in my life. The only one on my side." The little squirrel, sensing his distress, tried to soothe him by rolling onto its back to reveal its belly. In that moment, John forgot the squirrel was anything more than a small, innocent creature, and the squirrel forgot she was, in fact, a girl. He scooped her up carefully, holding her close. Her warmth and softness calmed him, and the squirrel relaxed under his gentle touch, eventually falling asleep. But as she rested, she failed to notice John's increasingly unhinged gaze. Whispering softly, he said, "I wish I could be with you forever." The paper brought by the little squirrel fell to the ground, revealing a passage. Magicians who rely on divine beasts to stabilize their magic often develop a strong sense of possessiveness toward them. This possessiveness can become so extreme that just seeing their divine beast with another magician may cause unbearable jealousy and emotional turmoil. The next day, the little squirrel was cleaned up and brought to the glowing master, Tom. The day before, Tom had tried to prepare himself for the event, even applying a facial mask to enhance his appearance. Watching Tom flaunt himself, Eureka couldn't help but fantasize about stomping on the little villain's smooth face. When Tom finally opened the door, he greeted the room with false politeness. "Sorry I'm late," he said, pretending his tardiness was due to ensuring the divine beast could stabilize his magic. But his smug demeanor said otherwise. As the little squirrel observed, she noticed something glowing beside her. Marier, the heroine of the novel, was stunningly beautiful. As expected of the heroine, she thought. Curious, she wondered how John would react, knowing that in the original storyline, he fell in love with Marier at first sight. Surprisingly, John wasn't staring at Marier. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the divine beast. "It's a divine beast," she murmured, awestruck. "I've heard they're incredibly rare and hard to acquire. This is my first time seeing one." Marier's mother chimed in, commenting on John's magical abilities. "So much magic that you need a divine beast to control it? You look just like Duke Hellard." Tom, eager to bask in the attention, puffed himself up. "I still have many shortcomings compared to my father," he said humbly. "But without the divine beast, it's hard to manage the magic strain." Curiosity got the better of him as Tom suddenly pressed his hand onto the little squirrel's head. John's pupils contracted sharply as he watched. "My beast," he thought possessively. Tom continued, oblivious to John's reaction. "When you put your hand on its head like this, the pain just melts away." Meanwhile, the little squirrel noticed the glass cup beside her trembling slightly, followed by the entire room vibrating. Suddenly, the glass near John shattered. Ella, startled, assumed John had knocked it over. "Are you feeling unwell?" she asked. "This is an important occasion, so please control yourself." Only the little squirrel understood the truth. It wasn't John's clumsiness, but the raging magic inside him causing the disturbance. Is this still the aftermath of the rain from earlier? She wondered. She hurried toward John but slipped on the wet floor, skidding uncontrollably. Just as she was about to crash, a hand shot out and caught her. "You need to be more careful," John said in a low voice, audible only to her. "Don't run around where I can't protect you." Even as his voice remained calm, the little squirrel sensed something was off. Tom, noticing the moment, stood up and smiled insincerely. "Thank you, John," he said. Now can you give my divine beast back to me?" Instead of returning the squirrel immediately, John laughed and said, "Tom, what's the squirrel's name?" The little villain hesitated, a guilty expression flickering across his face. "You know what?" John continued, his tone sharp. "Such a precious beast. You can't just keep calling it mine, can you? Based on your reaction, I'm guessing you haven't given it a name yet?" Tom's cheeks turned red as he stammered. Her name is Slave." The word lingered awkwardly in his mouth before he swallowed it back, realizing just how unacceptable it sounded. Even Tom had to admit that calling the divine beast slave was out of line. Seeing his hesitation, John smirked. "You really think you can keep calling her that? Let me help you name her," he suggested casually. Before Tom could respond, Marrier interjected enthusiastically. "That's a great idea. She's so cute. Her name should come from me." Tom, eager to please Marrier, agreed instantly. "Of course, it's my honor for you to name it." The little squirrel, sensing an opportunity, ran over to Marrier. She crouched down and studied little Squirrel thoughtfully. Your tail is so fluffy and cute, and those dark eyes are beautiful too. How about we call you Little Black?" The squirrel froze in shock. "Little Black? That's so plain and uncreative." But before she could react, everyone except John chimed in with praise for the name. "It's perfect," they said. Eureka, however, didn't look impressed. She muttered under her breath, "I don't like it at all." But no one seemed to notice. Marrier turned to the squirrel and said sweetly, "Little Black, I'm so happy to meet you today." As Marrier's hand touched Eureka, Eureka suddenly sensed a faint surge of magic. Before she could confirm it, Marrier had pulled her hand back, and the moment passed. As Tom called, "Little Black, come here." The squirrel reluctantly ran toward him. He's so annoying, she thought. But glancing at John, she realized that if she didn't play along, Tom might take his frustration out on John instead. Reaching Tom, the little villain beamed with pride. "Well done," he said smugly. John forced himself to look away, clenching his fist to suppress his emotions. Meanwhile, far away in Motaine, a man and a woman were engaged in a serious discussion. "Does the squirrel sold to the Hellard family really need to be retrieved?" the man asked. "Yes," the woman replied. "The current experiment requires that specific squirrel." "But there are so many other divine beasts available," he protested. "They won't work. The experimental results won't be as accurate as with that squirrel," she explained. The man frowned. "But it's Hellard. If that squirrel becomes human, it could cause trouble, especially if it remembers the experiment." The woman waved off his concerns. "Don't worry about that. I confirmed with Mrs. Hellard herself. Her son has almost no magical power. The temple only sells divine beasts to nobles with weak magic. There's no risk." Still, the man didn't look convinced. "The squirrel must be retrieved," she insisted. Back at the Hellard estate, a gentle knock echoed at John's window. It was the little squirrel, appearing once again. John smiled and said, "You don't have to knock every time. I've been waiting for you." By this point, the little squirrel had been absorbing John's magic for over 40 days. John sat down, and the little squirrel immediately held out her paw. "I'll help you calm down," her gesture seemed to say. "Wait a minute," John interrupted. "Take your time today. Every time you settle my magic, you leave right after. Stay with me for a while, okay?" His expectant eyes made it impossible for her to refuse. She waved her paw to signal her agreement, and his face lit up with a joyful smile. "You promised, little one." "Thank you," he said softly. As the squirrel observed him closely, her curiosity grew. "Is there something funny about my hair?" he teased when he noticed her staring. She gave a little growl, her way of expressing satisfaction. His hair was soft and smooth, and the squirrel found it oddly comforting. Suddenly, John's gaze shifted. He noticed the golden thread from the palace girl from Medster. The sight of it made him recall the name Marrier had given the squirrel, Little Black. For some reason, the thought put him in a foul mood. "How ridiculous would it be to actually call you Little Black?" he mused. "You deserve a cuter name. How about I call you Furry Ball from now on?" he suggested, his expression filled with anticipation. "Do you like this name?" The little squirrel's inner reaction was less enthusiastic. "No, I don't," she thought. This guy is terrible at naming things. But she reluctantly nodded, not wanting to hurt his feelings. Would he be upset if I refused? Probably. She sighed inwardly, accepting the name for his sake. Seeing her nod, John's face lit up. "I knew you'd like it. It suits you so well. Fluffy and cute, just like you." He paused, his expression softening. "Was our meeting accidental? I don't know why, but I feel like it was meant to be." The little squirrel could only answer his questions silently in her heart. "It wasn't an accident. I found you on purpose." John suddenly reached out and brushed her fur gently by her ear. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It's just that you're so small and delicate. I can't help but want to protect you. You're too precious, too special." His voice grew firmer as he added, "I'll make sure you have the best. More gold, The nicest room, whatever you want. I'll make you happier than you ever were with Tom. From now on, I'll protect you." The little squirrel felt a pang of sadness at his words. "But you'll soon be sent to the battlefield," she thought. "The temple is developing a new tranquilizer. Once you drink it, you'll be able to stabilize your magic on your own. You'll grow stronger and won't need me anymore. Eventually, you'll forget about a divine beast like me." Determined not to let the moment slip away, she resolved, "But until that day comes, I'll do everything I can to make our time together meaningful." Not long after, a carriage from the temple arrived. The Grand Priest, who had previously sold the mythical beast to the Hellard family, had come bearing news. "The divine beast is unable to fully calm the magic," he explained, his tone heavy with implication. The temple announced plans to reclaim the divine beast, offering a potion as compensation. This potion, they claimed, could suppress the chaotic effects of magic just as effectively as the divine beast. They explained that even the Duke of Hellard had used this potion. Ella, who had spent a fortune on the divine beast to prove her son's supposed extraordinary magical talent, was intrigued. Though the potion lacked the same influence as a divine beast, it was the same type of remedy Tom's father had relied on. It's good enough, she thought. However, recent events had made her uneasy. John's behavior had become unpredictable. There was the incident where a maid was pelted with nuts, followed by his abrupt return to the tower. While he usually didn't resist orders, this sudden defiance unsettled her. She dismissed the temple's compensation offer, claiming it wasn't necessary. Yet she couldn't ignore whispers of another potion the temple possessed, one that could turn people into easily manipulated puppets. What Ella and the temple didn't know was that their supposedly private conversation had been overheard by the little squirrel. Furious and alarmed, the squirrel realized that Ella's intentions weren't merely about magic control. She planned to hurt John, just as in the original story, where John was manipulated into using the temple's potion to win Marrier's favor. "I can't let him end up like that," the squirrel resolved. While John was sorting through papers in his room, the little squirrel burst in, interrupting his work. "Why are you here?" he asked, surprised. "It's the middle of the day. You'll be seen easily." The squirrel, desperate, gestured frantically, trying to communicate. "Help me erase this mark," she pleaded silently. "Ella wants to hurt you. There's danger now." But such complex thoughts couldn't be conveyed through gestures, and John misinterpreted her urgency. "Are you upset because you think someone wants to kill me?" he asked, confused. His heart ached at the thought. Realizing gestures weren't enough, the squirrel knew what she had to do. "This can't continue," she thought. "I have to explain everything clearly." Summoning her courage, she transformed into her human form right before John's eyes. Grabbing his shoulders tightly, she said, "Listen carefully. I don't have time to explain everything slowly. The temple is coming to take me away." The revelation left John stunned. "What do you mean, take you away?" he asked, his voice trembling with both confusion and fear. "They say I don't have the ability to call magic anymore, so they want to take me back," Eureka explained, her voice filled with urgency. "It feels strange. I need to leave here immediately." "So you're leaving?" John asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes," she replied firmly. "Please, John, help me erase this mark. It's the only way I can leave. I don't want to be taken back to the temple and die like this." Though it pained him to let her go, John knelt in front of her, determination shining in his eyes. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll remove it for you right now. I won't let you die." With a gentle touch of his hand, the mark disappeared without a trace. Eureka was finally free. "Thank you, John," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "Because of you, I can survive. But now you're in danger too. Ella plans to drug you, to turn you into a puppet." John's expression darkened. "That medicine—" "It only works under warm conditions," she interrupted. "So make sure you eat only cold food. And hold on just a little longer. Soon you'll be sent to the battlefield. Once there, you'll have access to sedatives and won't have to endure the pain of your magic anymore." Before she could say more, John grabbed her hand suddenly. "That's not what I'm worried about," he said, his voice trembling. "Are you trying to tell me that you've used all the magic you've accumulated? You wanted to be human so much that now everything has to start over?" Eureka gave him a reassuring smile and gently stroked his hair. "It doesn't matter. I'll become human again, no matter what. Don't worry about me. What's important is that you stay safe. Do you understand?" John pressed his lips together tightly and nodded. "You gave me my life. I promise I'll listen to you and live on. But where will you go now?" Just as Eureka opened her mouth to answer, her strength failed, and her form shimmered back into that of a small squirrel. At the same time, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Someone was coming. "Quick, you need to get out of here," John urged, his voice low but urgent. "Go, now." "Try to move through the trees and avoid people," John urged. "If you don't find a safe place to absorb magic, come back to me. I'll protect you, even on the battlefield. Go, I'll hold them off. Don't worry." The little squirrel hesitated, rubbing against him one last time. You're definitely not the villain, John, she thought. No one as kind and beautiful as you could ever be a villain. She glanced at him sadly. Are you telling me to live well and take care of myself? Her breathing quickened and she shook her head. No, that's not it, she thought. Without another word, she jumped out of the window. In her haste, she still remembered to take one last look at him. I'm sorry, she thought, as she disappeared into the distance. I'm leaving you in this lonely place, but I know you'll overcome these challenges and grow stronger. Someday people will realize the truth about you, that you were never the villain they painted you to be. And so, they parted. Even after the little squirrel had disappeared completely, John stood by the window, staring into the emptiness outside. She's really gone, he thought, his heart heavy. I still had so much to do for her. Shouts from outside broke his reverie as people called out searching for the squirrel. One voice said, She has a mark on her. If we don't find her soon, the temple might sell the divine beast to Tom. John's mind raced. Why would they sell her to Tom? That kid barely has any magic power. His determination hardened. I'll never let him go back to that place. Just then, someone knocked at his door. Excuse me, sir, a servant said. Have you seen Master Tom's divine beast? It's a squirrel named Little Black. I've never heard of anything called Little Black, John replied curtly. What a terrible name, he thought. Just in case, the servant continued. May I look around your room? Without waiting for permission, he began rummaging through John's belongings, muttering to himself. Even for the bonus, we must find that squirrel. What happens if we don't? I guess I won't be able to rest until we do. John chimed in, offering a sinister solution. If you can't find it, just bring me a dead squirrel, he said casually. We'll brand it with the Hellard mark and tell everyone it's the divine beast. Say it was bitten to death by a hound. Even if someone finds the real one later, we can deny knowing anything about it. The servant's voice turned deferential. I certainly appreciate your willingness to help, he said, but he left the room looking confused. Once the person searching for the divine beast had left, John let out a sigh of relief. This should fool the temple, he thought. But when he glanced at the bed, it almost seemed like the squirrel's small figure was still there. For a moment, doubt crept in. He hesitated. Do I really want to go through with this? Deep down, he didn't want her to leave. He didn't want to let go of the bond they had formed, but his survival instincts took over. Her safety is the most important thing, he reasoned. If there's anything in my life more valuable than my own security, it's her. Resolving to trust her intelligence and resourcefulness, he whispered to himself, You're smart. You'll find a way to escape successfully. Yet, he couldn't shake the growing emptiness. When did this happen? He wondered. When did I start looking forward to seeing her more than calming my magic? The thought struck him hard. With her departure, the nights he spent waiting for her would cease to exist. As time passed, John's life began to shift toward what had been prophesied. He would soon go to the battlefield. Meanwhile, Heir opened the window one day to see an exhausted little squirrel lying there. She immediately noticed the familiar golden thread tied to his leg. Are you Little Black? She asked softly. When the squirrel woke again, she was lying on a cushion. Are you awake? Heir asked, bringing her food. She had been on the run for so long, with barely anything to eat. She gasped as she watched the squirrel eat ravenously. Little Black, you're really eating a lot. Is it that delicious? As the squirrel ate, Heir's curiosity got the better of her. But how did you get here? Hellard is so far away. Don't worry, I'll take you back. The squirrel froze at her words. I can't go back there. Her thoughts raced. I have to find a way to get a message to her. With renewed determination, she jumped off the cushion and scurried over to the desk. She began rummaging through the papers there, searching for something, anything, that could help him convey her message. The little squirrel tapped on the papers, directing Heir's attention to the words. Heir stepped forward and began reading aloud as she indicated. Were you abused by Hellard? Heir exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief. How could they do such a thing? Is that why you ran away and came here? The little squirrel rubbed against her, confirming her guess. Heir's expression hardened. I can't believe they treated you like this. Memories of the last Camellia party surfaced in her mind, and she recalled Tom's cruel personality. He was so rude to his brother. It makes sense now. No, she declared firmly. I'll never send Little Black back to Hellard. I'll protect you from now on. Don't worry. Meanwhile, at the temple, the news of the little squirrel's supposed death caused some concern. One of the women voiced her doubts. The will of a typical divine beast to become human isn't usually strong, she said. So we don't need to worry too much. That divine beast should be manageable. Despite their assumptions, the little squirrel's plan to secure her freedom was progressing smoothly. Back in Marior's room, she appeared in front of the little squirrel, her face tired. "Blackie, here I am," she said softly. The little squirrel cooed in concern. "Did something happen?" she seemed to ask. "It's nothing," Marior replied with a small sigh. "I'm just a little tired. Lester Lacey says they won't be able to pay their taxes again this time. They've struggled because of the war. I get that. But the entire country is at war. How have they not managed their taxes yet? Have I been supporting them too much?" Though Marior was kind and compassionate, she sometimes failed to grasp the full complexity of people's motives, often being taken advantage of by those with hidden agendas. It was no surprise that Medsturga, her domain, had fallen so quickly in the original story. Determined to help her, the little squirrel pointed at a pile of firewood nearby, miming a chopping motion. He then gestured emphatically as if to say it was unnecessary. Marior tilted her head, trying to understand. "You mean it's hot over there, and they don't need firewood?" she asked, her expression brightening as the realization clicked. The little squirrel nodded eagerly. Though Marior could be a bit slow to catch on, her kind heart and willingness to listen made her someone worth helping. "So you're saying they can use this instead of paying their taxes?" Marior asked thoughtfully. The little squirrel nodded vigorously, as if to say, "That's right. That's exactly it." "Blackie, you're so smart," Marior praised. In another part of the mansion, Marior's mother sat quietly, holding a lock of hair in her hands. Her expression was wistful. "Eureka," she whispered. "If I had known I would lose you that day, I would never have gone to the temple. If you were still alive, you'd have grown up by now. If only I could see you again with your warm, pink eyes, then I'd have no regrets." Meanwhile, the little squirrel was enjoying the most peaceful days of her life under Marior's care. Everyone here was kind to her, and the atmosphere felt almost magical. But her tranquility was interrupted by the sound of someone crying. Curiosity piqued, she perched by the window to peer inside. It was the Duke of Medster. Marior had mentioned that her mother's health had been deteriorating recently, and the little squirrel decided to investigate. When the lady opened her eyes, she was startled to see the small creature watching her. "They say Marier recently got a squirrel," she murmured. "Is that you?" Her voice trembled. "Ah, you remind me of my Eureka." The squirrel tilted his head, listening. The lady continued, her tone soft and sorrowful. "Eureka had light brown hair and pink eyes. Medsturga's decline began because children closely related to our family often go missing. Now, only Marior is left. After losing Eureka, my health has never been the same." Though the little squirrel couldn't do anything to heal her, she felt a strong urge to comfort her. She rolled onto her back, exposing her belly, as if to say, "Would touching my belly make you feel better?" The lady's laughter was light and genuine for the first time in a long while. "Thank you," she said gently. "I don't know why, but seeing you calms my mind. Could you come to me often? I'll prepare plenty of delicious food for you." The squirrel perked up her ears and smiled. She liked it here, with this kind and gentle mother and daughter. It felt like a safe haven. But at the same time, back at the Hellard estate, John was preparing for the battlefield. Dressed in his armor, his expression was cold and detached. A servant knocked and announced, "Master, it's time for you to go." John's dark eyes flickered with indifference as he replied, "I'll be down in a moment." Lord Hellard had died on the battlefield. John couldn't even remember what his father looked like, and he felt nothing upon hearing the news. What mattered more was that everything the little squirrel had said was coming true. Without the little squirrel's intervention, he would have likely lost himself entirely and become Ella's puppet. Though John didn't fully understand how the squirrel knew all of this, he chose to trust him. He resolved to go to war, win the battle, and return stronger. When the war was over, he would discard the name Hillard and eliminate both Ella and the temple that threatened the little squirrel. Since their parting, John had never forgotten the little squirrel. He had long considered the little squirrel his only family and held on to the hope of reuniting with her one day. Meanwhile, the little squirrel had been with Marior, absorbing enough magic to prepare for her final transformation. She was ready to fulfill her goal of becoming human again. Without hesitation, she transformed into her human form in front of Marior, intending to explain everything. Marior's face shifted between confusion and shock. "Little Black, what is going on with you?" Just as the Duchess entered the room unexpectedly. Seeing Eureka, who bore a striking resemblance to her late daughter, the Duchess gasped in delight. "Eureka, is it really you? God has heard my prayers," she exclaimed, overcome with emotion. But the combination of her weak body and the mental shock caused her to faint. Eureka panicked, not expecting such a reaction. Thankfully, the doctor assured her that the Duchess's health was stable and that she would regain consciousness in a few hours. However, he warned that the Duchess must not endure any further emotional stress. As Marior sat on the sofa in thought, Eureka sat nearby. When Marior finally came to her senses, she apologized. "I'm sorry if we frightened you. My sister had the same hair and eye color as you. That's why my mother made the mistake." "No," Eureka said softly. "It's me who should apologize." I didn't expect this reaction. Marrier's demeanor softened and she smiled. So you're human now, right? Eureka blushed slightly. How did you know? I've been reading books about divine beasts, Marrier replied. But I have to ask, where did you absorb magic? Don't you need to absorb it for 50 consecutive days to transform? Eureka hesitated before explaining. Well, I actually absorbed magic from you. Marrier's eyes widened in shock. But I don't know any magic at all. I don't know why. But you really do have very powerful magic. The little squirrel shifted uneasily, worried that Marrier might be upset with her for unintentionally using her to absorb magic. But instead of anger, she surprised her by saying, Did I help you? That makes me so happy. Her words left Eureka stunned. Is she an angel? Eureka wondered. After learning about the little squirrel's struggles and her uncertain future, Marrier hesitated before making a heartfelt suggestion. Would you consider being my sister? I know it's a selfish request, but my mother doesn't have much time left. I want her remaining days to be filled with the happiness of having her daughter back. The little squirrel remembered that in the original story, Mrs. Medster had passed away from the grief of losing her daughter, not long before Marrier reached adulthood. She had been a kind and warm woman who treated her like family. Seeing her hesitation, Marrier quickly added, I'm sorry if this puts pressure on you, but I really hope you'll stay. I don't want to be separated from you, she continued, her voice soft but sincere. Thanks to you, my mother has been feeling much better lately. You've helped me so much, helped Medster so much. Your presence gives me strength and support. But isn't it shameless of me to ask for even more from you after all you've done? The squirrel's heart softened. It's not shameless. It's me, she thought. She had no reason to refuse. Becoming Medster's adopted daughter offered many benefits, but that wasn't why she wanted to stay. The real reason was the people who had treated her like family. Even though she couldn't speak, she wanted to repay their kindness. I promise you, she said finally, I'll be Eureka. Marrier's face lit up with joy as she hugged her tightly. Really? Then I'll call you Eureka from now on. Please take care of me, big sister. Her excitement was so overwhelming that she nearly fainted. The little squirrel, or Eureka, made a decision. For Marrier and Mrs. Medster, she would protect Medster's wealth and reputation and work to find a cure for the Duchess's illness. Soon, news spread across Medster that the lost second daughter had returned. While many dismissed it as a hoax, the little squirrel didn't care. She didn't plan to hide. Instead, she chose to travel openly. Her first destination was a renowned nursing home to some of the best doctors in the country. In her previous life, this was where Renette Cardan had treated the crown prince, who was gravely ill at the time. One day, as the little squirrel went about her tasks, she resolved to find a way to meet Renette as soon as possible. The Duchess had always been gentle and warm toward her, a kindness that made her feel genuinely happy, almost as if she truly had a mother. Determined to help her, she knew she needed to find Renette and persuade him to go to the academy to further his studies and work toward curing the Duchess's illness. While visiting the nursery, she noticed a boy sitting in the corner, engrossed in a book. Hello, Eureka said, startling the boy. The boy jumped up in a panic. Sorry, I didn't hear you coming, the boy stammered. I didn't realize it was you. It's okay, Eureka reassured him. I didn't mean to disturb you. What are you reading so intently? Hearing someone take an interest in his hobby, the boy's eyes lit up. It's a newly published medical book, he said, eagerly beginning to explain its contents. Is that so? Eureka asked. What's your name? I'm Renette Cardan, the boy replied. Eureka's heart leapt. I didn't expect to find Renette so easily. You're interested in medicine, aren't you? Have you ever thought about going to medical school? Renette hesitated, lowering his head. Just as he was about to say no, the dean of the nursery appeared. Renette, stop pretending, the dean said gently. Renette's face turned red, and he quickly hid the book behind his back. I'm not interested in medicine, he mumbled. The dean sighed. There's no need to lie. Maid, could you sponsor him? Renette is deeply interested in medicine and has a natural gift for it, but he's afraid of becoming a burden to the nursery and has never dared to speak up about it. I don't want him to miss this opportunity. Eureka suddenly understood why the dean's gaze had seemed so unusual when they first met. I see, she said. But Renette, flustered, protested. I won't go to medical school. All my friends are here and I can just read on my own. The dean smiled knowingly. Renette, we all know you've been reading medical school applications in secret every day. You even hide and peek at them. The whole nursery knows. Eureka joined in the persuasion. If you miss this chance to learn, won't your family here be sad for you? She smiled warmly and added, I swear on the name of Medster, I'll sponsor your education. You'll be able to focus entirely on your studies. So, what do you say? Will you go to medical school and pursue a formal education? After some hesitation, Renette finally accepted the sponsorship. Eureka had successfully found a doctor while also gathering important information about the nursery. Yet, as she left, her thoughts drifted to her furry ballmaster. She missed the days when she was still a mythical beast and would meet him at this time every day. I wonder how he's doing now, Eureka thought. Unbeknownst to her at that very moment, John was thinking of her too. "Master, aren't you eating?" a servant asked. John simply gestured for silence. Nearby, someone noticed peanuts and seeds scattered on a rock. "By the way," they said, "you're always collecting nuts." A rustling sound came from the trees. "Is that a squirrel?" someone asked. "Maybe it's hungry. These must be delicious." John smiled faintly. "Who says they're not?" he replied. No matter how many times he heard such comments, he never got used to how others viewed him. He was just a man holding onto a loaned memory, a memory tied to the little squirrel. I wonder how she's doing now, he thought again. Every sunset, John found himself thinking of Eureka. It was at this time that he used to wait for the little squirrel to come running toward him. He often whispered to himself, "When the war is over, I'll come to find you. Then I'll help you become human. And when you're human, you'll have nowhere to go, no family. Let's live together. We'll be each other's only family." Back in Medster, Marrier's uncle had taken notice of the little squirrel. Though the two initially disliked each other, Marrier's uncle was fiercely protective of his niece. He adored her, cherishing her as if she were a fragile treasure. He was a strict and upright man, someone who appeared tough on the outside, but was soft-hearted and caring. Tragically, in the original story, he died young due to poisoning, leaving Marrier isolated after her mother's death. She was left with no one to rely on until she met the Crown Prince, the male protagonist of the story. Eureka, aware of this narrative, had no intention of letting Marrier's fate follow its original path. "I don't want her to rely on the male protagonist to save her. I want Marrier to have everything and be happy," she resolved. However, her uncle remained a challenge. He was hostile toward the little squirrel, ignoring her and often being curt with Marrier. Yet, despite his stern demeanor, he didn't stop feeding the squirrel. One day, the uncle looked at her and asked, "What's your name?" The little squirrel froze for a moment before replying, "My name is Eureka." "No, I mean your real name," the uncle insisted. The squirrel hesitated. "My real name?" The words caught in her throat, and after a moment of struggle, she said with difficulty, "My name is Little Black." The uncle frowned in confusion. How can anyone be called by such a name? Halfway through the meal, he couldn't resist starting another lecture. "Marrier, why are you still so casual? How could you treat a stranger like family? And why did you agree to Nelia training troops? Don't you know that troops aren't allowed to be stationed there?" Eureka bristled, annoyed at the uncle's constant criticism of Marrier. But before she could say anything, Marrier stopped her, calmly addressing the issue. "There was a dispute in the area," she explained. "I had no choice but to raise the tax rate. They agreed to pay taxes in cotton and grain. However, because food supplies are scarce on their side, they can't support too many soldiers. Since it's at the border, they claim to have raised troops out of fear of unrest. If things stabilize, they've promised to reduce their forces." The uncle blinked in surprise. For a moment, he seemed to see the Duke himself reflected in his niece. "I didn't expect her to grow so reliable," he thought. "Did you get a new teacher?" he asked. "No," Marrier replied with a smile. "Eureka helped me a lot. She even suggested solutions to this issue. She's young, but amazing, isn't she?" The uncle looked at Eureka with a mix of astonishment and stubbornness. "I didn't expect this child to be so clever," he admitted grudgingly. "But I'm not surprised. At your father's age, he also introduced significant reforms to territorial law. Genius must run in the family." "Uncle, please take care of Eureka," Marrier said earnestly. "My mother and I consider her family. She makes us feel as if the real Eureka has returned." At her words, the uncle's expression softened, a trace of sadness flickering in his eyes. "Marrier," he said quietly, "I still believe that the real Eureka will return someday." Just then, the Duchess arrived, her gentle smile lighting up the room. She chatted warmly with Eureka, her laughter filling the air. The uncle watched, his heart unexpectedly touched by the sight. He hadn't seen his sister so happy in a long time. Looking at this warm scene, the uncle's prejudice began to waver. Maybe I shouldn't judge her so harshly, he thought. Finally, Marrier helped her mother back to her room to rest, leaving Eureka and her uncle alone. Eureka busied herself gathering food when the uncle suddenly spoke. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have treated you like that earlier. As an elder, I was immature. I'm sorry if I upset you. You're incredibly smart, and because of that, I may have been unfair to you." Eureka paused, surprised by the apology. The uncle continued, his tone earnest. "The Medster family is in great danger. With the Duke missing, Marrier has stepped up to lead the family, but she lacks experience and the necessary skills. Meanwhile, we're being watched by a group of people eager to take advantage of our vulnerabilities." If something happens to Marrier, the responsibility of leading the family could fall to you. But you're not related to Medster by blood, and that could make things even more dangerous for you. That's why I've been worried." Eureka tilted her head, touched by the uncle's words. "So this person is worried about me?" she thought. Despite his sharp tongue and arrogance, it was clear the uncle genuinely cared for her. "Thank you for your concern," Eureka replied. "But if I can, I want to stay here. My identity as a palace maid doesn't matter to me. I just really care about Marrier and Mrs. Sienna. They mean as much to me as family. Even though I'll leave one day, I want to do everything I can to help my sister stabilize the family and ensure the Duchess's health. They're too precious to me." The uncle softened. "It certainly shows. My sister is in the best health she's been in for years, and I think it's thanks to you. Thank you." With those words, the uncle shyly excused himself and left the room. Eureka's heart ached. How could such a good person die so young? She wondered. Determined not to let the tragedy unfold, she resolved to find out who had poisoned the uncle. But given the uncle's awkward personality, it wouldn't be easy to approach anyone directly for help. Instead, she decided to investigate on her own. "I should check his condition first," she thought. Just as she was mulling over her plan, Eureka knocked on the door. "May I come in?" "You didn't eat much earlier, so I brought sandwiches," she said. The uncle opened the door, intending to refuse, but stopped when he saw how much effort she had put into the gesture. He sighed. "All right, I'll eat a little." Eureka smiled. "I made these myself. I thought we could eat together." The uncle took a bite and was surprised by how delicious they were. "Is this about what I said to you earlier?" he asked, glancing at her. No, Eureka said quickly. "I was just worried that you might be hungry." The uncle chuckled softly, his mood lightening. "It's very good. Thank you. And don't worry too much. Nothing's going to happen anytime soon." Eureka, concerned, asked, "Have you ever had a grudge or argument with anyone?" Albert chuckled lightly, dismissing the idea. "No one holds a grudge against me, and there's no one who could profit from my death. But just in case, if something were to happen to me, I hope you can help take care of a girl I sponsor. Her name is Selisic." The mention of Selisic surprised Eureka. Albert continued, "The doctor says she has an illness she'll never recover from, and I've been worried about her." Eureka's heart sank. In the original story, Selisic was a villain, someone who seemed kind on the surface but secretly sowed discord. She even almost caused Marrier to break up with the crown prince. But she wasn't sick in the book. She hesitated before asking, "Is Selisic in poor health?" "Yes," Albert replied. "The doctor says it's incurable, so I've always worried about her." Eureka's mind raced. This doesn't add up. In the original story, Selisic was a manipulative character who framed and tortured Marrier. She came from poverty, yet had enough money to orchestrate elaborate schemes. Could it be that Albert, so different from his counterpart in the original timeline, has unknowingly become a victim in this life? Could Selisic be plotting something against him? Albert seemed oblivious to Eureka's concerns, but his discomfort became evident as the night wore on. He tossed and turned, unable to sleep, his stomach bloated and aching. "I haven't felt well lately, no matter what I eat," he muttered to himself. "I ate a lot today, but something still feels off. That kid doesn't seem like a bad person, though. If the real Eureka were alive, she should have been someone like her." Just then, a knock came at the door. It was the doctor from the Duke's household. "I came on Miss Eureka's orders," he said. "She was worried about you after she weren't feeling well." Albert tensed. "Is the child okay?" he asked anxiously. "Marrier is taking care of Miss Eureka, but she's worried about you," the doctor replied. "So she asked me to check on you." "I'm fine," Albert insisted. "Go back and take care of Eureka." But the doctor's tone turned pleading. "Please, let me check on you. Miss Eureka cares about you deeply." Albert hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. "Fine, but I don't think there's anything to check." When the examination was finished, the doctor's face turned grim. "Count Albert, you've been chronically poisoned for a long time," he said, his voice filled with shock. On the second day, Eureka finally confirmed her suspicions about Selisic. Using information from Marrier, she discovered Selisic's deceit. Not only had Selisic faked an illness with the help of a doctor, but she was also plotting to kill Albert and had forged a fraudulent inheritance document to claim his estate. Fortunately, Eureka had asked Renette about possible poisons and learned of an herb that could reveal toxicity when ingested. Acting quickly, she added the herb to Albert's sandwich. When Albert ate it, Eureka observed his reaction, confirming the presence of poison. "Uncle also sent a letter asking about you. He said he wants to thank you in person and take you somewhere." Soon after, by the light of flickering candles, Eureka followed Albert to an underground chamber. The place had an oppressive atmosphere, one that felt heavy with memories. "Is he planning to lock me in here?" Eureka wondered uneasily. Albert, however, had other intentions. With Eureka's help, Albert was finally able to let go of the guilt that had plagued him for years. He brought Eureka to a hall that housed portraits of past patriarchs of the family. "This is the Duke of Medster," Albert explained, pointing to a portrait. "He was Marier's father. When he went missing on the battlefield, my brother-in-law had to step up and lead. I always respected him as if he were my own brother. Because of that, I often come here when something important happens." Albert turned to face the portrait and spoke solemnly. "Today, I want to make a commitment in front of him. I won't forget your kindness, Eureka. Without you, I might not have discovered the poison in time." "No, it was just a coincidence," Eureka replied modestly. Albert's expression grew somber. "Marrier doesn't know about this, but when Eureka, my niece, went to the temple for her baptism, I was the one who insisted on accompanying her. My sister had said she didn't want to continue with the ceremony, but I pushed for it. After we were attacked, I woke up to find Eureka was gone. I've blamed myself ever since." He paused, his voice heavy with regret. "I always had a feeling there was something suspicious about Selisik, but my guilt blinded me. When she claimed she could replace Eureka, I ignored my instincts. If not for you, I might still be trapped in the past, unable to see what's truly important." Albert turned to Eureka, his tone filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Eureka. I won't make the same mistakes again. I'll do my best to be a better uncle to Marrier and protect this family." He smiled faintly. "So, let's get along well in the future." Eureka smiled happily. "Okay, Earl." But Albert frowned. "Call me uncle," he said, clearly displeased. "I don't want my niece using such a cold address. You should call me uncle, not Earl." Eureka couldn't help but think, why is he so adorable when he's like this? As they continued walking, Eureka noticed that many of the portraits in the corridor featured animals. "This one," she said, pointing at a portrait. "Is it because Medster's ancestors were orcs?" Albert shrugged. "I don't know the full story. You can ask Marrier about it later. Dinner should be ready by now. Why don't you join us, Uncle?" Albert seemed flustered but charmed when Eureka started calling him Uncle. His words came out awkwardly as he replied, "I don't need to. I'm not hungry yet." Behind them, one of the portraits featured a squirrel resembling a girl. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Hillard's soldiers were cornered, desperate for a miracle. Suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning struck from the sky, annihilating the enemy forces. The soldiers, initially believing reinforcements had arrived, were shocked to discover that it was Master John Hellard who had saved them. John, seeing his companions dying, had unleashed a risky spell despite the chaotic state of his magic. Exhausted, he ordered his troops to step back and rest. One soldier pleaded, "Young master, leave these beasts alone. We've suffered enough since the Duke of Medster disappeared." The soldier's words carried weight, as many in the army had witnessed the Duke transform into a tiger. Though incredible, it wasn't entirely unbelievable that humans could become beasts. Hillard smiled faintly and replied, "It's not so incredible. I've seen it before, a squirrel transformed into the cutest child I've ever known." Hillard's thoughts drifted. "If Furry Ball could see me now, I think she'd be proud. Thanks to her, I've been able to use magic again. When I return, I'll repay her kindness." Time passed, and everyone strove for a better future, for themselves and for their loved ones. On this day, after years of hardship, the long war finally ended. Under Renette's skilled care, the Duchess's health fully recovered. 5 years had passed since Eureka first met Renette, and during that time, Renette displayed unparalleled talent and a strong sense of independence. He became the youngest genius doctor in the Empire. Despite numerous prestigious offers, Renette turned them all down, insisting on remaining Medster's attending physician. "Thank you for choosing Medster," Eureka told him gratefully. "Please stay with us in the future." But to Renette, Eureka was his benefactor. "I'm the one who should thank you," he replied. "You've given me a chance to repay your kindness." Though the Duchess's body had been healed, Marrier's fate remained unchanged. According to the War Covenant, after the Duke's disappearance, Marrier was expected to join the army. However, as the last remaining bloodline of Medster, the royal family offered her an alternative. She could stay at the Duke's house on official duty if she agreed to marry the war hero. The hero in question was none other than John Hellard, who had risen to the rank of great magician after his heroic efforts in battle. If Marrier's heart was free, this marriage might not have been a problem. However, Marrier was already in love with Crown Prince Romand, a fact that made the situation complicated. Unable to control her feelings, Eureka could understand the dilemma Marrier faced. "Sister," Eureka gently said, "you've been sighing a lot lately. Is it because of the marriage with the war hero?" Marrier was startled. She hadn't expected her sister to notice. "I've always known that my marriage is part of my duty," she admitted. "I've tried hard not to fall for His Highness, but it seems like I've failed. I'm sorry, Eureka, for being like this when I should be happy." John was no longer the villain from the original story. However, the fact remained. Marrier didn't love him. forcing John to marry someone who didn't love him would still lead to tragedy. Eureka hadn't worked tirelessly for years just to see this unhappy ending. Her greatest wish was for her sister to be truly happy. "Sister," Eureka said softly, "what the royal family agreed to was that the daughter from Medster would marry the hero, right? And since you love the crown prince, I'll take care of this." As the city celebrated the war's end, the entire atmosphere was filled with joy. Festivities welcomed the return of the heroes, especially John, who had finally returned after 5 long years. The boy who had once been beaten down had now grown into a hero who could stand tall. But behind the glory, John had come back for one reason: to reunite with his little squirrel. John's magic had only grown more powerful, and his presence exuded strength. Spotting a squirrel from afar, John raised his hand, and an acorn appeared in the boy's hands. It was a gift from the great hero to his little squirrel. Whispers ran through the crowd about how much Lord John loved animals, particularly squirrels. He had even planted oak trees in his estates, leading many to believe he was simply fond of wildlife. But only John knew the truth. It wasn't about animals. It was about the little squirrel who had once changed his life. Eureka, however, had made a decision. In order for Marrier to marry the one she loved, she would use a loophole in the original agreement. The covenant had specified the daughter of Medster, but Marrier wasn't the only daughter in the household. "I will marry the war hero," Eureka said with a mischievous smile. Marrier gasped. "You can't sacrifice yourself for me." "This isn't a sacrifice," Eureka reassured her. "Thanks to you, I became part of the Medster family. Let me fulfill this small duty for you now." "And," she added with a playful twinkle in her eye, "you know my abilities, sister. I'll handle everything smoothly this time, too." Marrier clenched her hand tightly. "You have no idea how lucky I feel to have you by my side," she said, "but I'm worried things might not go as we hope. I don't want to make things difficult for you." "Don't worry, sis," Eureka reassured her with a smile. "Everything will work out." She was confident. While the original story depicted John falling in love with Marrier at first sight, the plot had already shifted. Under Eureka's influence, John had grown into a gentle and kind person. Even if something went wrong, Eureka could rely on her position as a benefactor to smooth things over. Still, she couldn't deny her eagerness to meet John again. "I wonder how much he's changed over the years," she thought. On his first day back at the Duke's estate, John was already planning how to find his little squirrel. Meanwhile, he had dealt decisively with Ella and Tom, banishing them underground. However, John hadn't anticipated one complication. Before John come back, Ella had written a letter to the king in John's name, proposing a discussion about marriage. When John read the letter, he crumpled it into a ball and tossed it aside without hesitation. "I'm not interested in marrying anyone else," he muttered. His attendant, trying to remain neutral, commented, "If you want to control the capital's social circles, it might be helpful to align with the Medster." John's face darkened. "I don't care about that," he replied coldly. "All I want is to be with the woman I like and live a sweet life." The attendant sighed inwardly. "This damn love-struck fool," he thought, but he still tried to reason with his master. "If the person you like hears about how indifferent you're being, it might harm your image." John, however, remained unbothered. "It doesn't matter. She already knows my sweet side." Still, he couldn't deny the potential misunderstandings about him and the Medsters. With a decisive tone, he announced, "I'll go to Medster tomorrow and clear this up. If they've just sent the letter, they're probably trying to trap me into an agreement. I'll break the engagement immediately." Every time Eureka felt unsettled, she found solace in a particular room filled with portraits of Medster ancestors. Standing before one of the portraits, she spoke softly. "The war is over, my lord. That's good for everyone, but it also means the temple will move again. Why did they lie to take me away? What were they after?" She sighed, her thoughts clouded with unanswered questions. Marrier mentioned that the ancestors of Medster were guided by a legend, but I couldn't find anything in the family records. Still, I can't shake the feeling that the legend of Medster, the disappearance of the real Eureka, and the divine beasts managed by the temple are connected. I won't give up investigating. Please watch over me, Your Excellency." Meanwhile, Marrier was caught off guard by John's surprise visit. He arrived unannounced and demanded to see her immediately. "Does he really intend to marry me?" she wondered aloud, her anxiety growing. "I didn't do anything to make him interested, did I? He doesn't seem like the type to fall in love so easily." While this unfolded, Eureka was meeting with Renette and her mother. However, Marrier couldn't focus. Her nerves had left her stomach in knots. Just then, the maid brought out a letter, revealing that Eureka already knew about the situation. "Please try to stall for as long as possible," the letter read. "Wait until I finish checking Mother's condition." Renette, a bit shy, nervously asked Eureka, "Would you like to join me for tea?" "I'm sorry," Eureka replied, "but I have guests to attend to." Renette looked disappointed but nodded understandingly. "Your face doesn't look very good, though," Renette added with concern. It's nothing, Eureka said quickly, but the truth was, she was so nervous about John's return that she hadn't slept well. By the way, Eureka asked, have you ever made a potion that makes someone look sick? Renette blinked, confused. Why would you want that? Eureka explained, because I want someone to think I look pitiful. Renette's eyes lit up with excitement. Oh, of course. I have a potion that can temporarily reverse magical energy and make your face look worse. I created it so the school wouldn't treat me like a workhorse, but I didn't think you'd need something so silly. Curious, Eureka asked to try the potion. How does it taste? She asked as she drank it. It's not bad, Renette replied, but moments later, Eureka swayed. Why does this potion feel so strong? She murmured, dizzy. Renette panicked. It shouldn't be working yet, he exclaimed, as Eureka grabbed his arm for support. I feel faint, Eureka muttered. Can you help me until this passes? Shortly after, Marrier received John, who entered the room with an air of intimidation. Seeing him again after 5 years, Marrier couldn't help but feel that John was scarier than ever, especially with his icy expression. I really don't want to be alone with him, she thought. Eureka had advised Marrier on how to handle John's demeanor. It's unreasonable for you to show up without responding to the letter, Marrier said firmly. John smirked arrogantly. You've judged me accurately, he replied. Then why are you here? Marrier pressed. As a war hero and heir to the Hellard family, I understand why this marriage arrangement exists, John said coolly. But I don't think I need to meet your expectations. What do you mean by that? Marrier asked cautiously. I want to break the engagement, John said bluntly. Marrier was stunned. Of all the possibilities she had considered, she hadn't imagined John would take the initiative to end the engagement. For a moment, she froze, unable to process the unexpected turn of events. John misinterpreted her reaction, assuming she was unwilling to let go. It's no use protesting, he said. I will annul the engagement. Finally, Marrier regained her composure. I feel the same way, she said, her tone steady. Good, John replied. Prepare the notarization immediately. The declaration was simple but decisive. John Hellard and Marrier, daughter of Medster, annul their engagement by decree. Marrier remained in a daze even after the formalities were complete. Eureka later explained that while John had risen as a hero of war, his influence in political circles was limited. Agreeing to annul the engagement would not have been an easy decision for him. But, John said coldly, let me make this clear. I want nothing to do with Medster anymore. I don't care whoever it is. It's just trouble and inconvenience for me. Marrier clenched her fists, seething at his arrogance. This guy hasn't even met my sister and he dares to speak like this, she thought. Well, since you feel that way, I hope my sister never has to see you. Let's add an additional clause to the divorce document. No matter what happens, it cannot be reversed. Do you agree? Certainly, John replied without hesitation. You can include it. I don't want to have anything to do with Medster anymore. Marrier's anger simmered, but she maintained her composure, forcing a smile. What you don't want will never happen. Once all the documents were signed, she looked at him sternly. You're far too arrogant and unreasonable, Mr. Hellard. I hope you take responsibility for your words when the time comes. John, oblivious to her underlying meaning, confidently replied, Of course, I'll never change my mind. Don't worry. I'll visit His Majesty the Emperor soon to formally propose breaking the engagement. Now, if you'll excuse me. He left, satisfied with how smoothly everything had gone. All that's left is to find his furry ball, he thought. However, John wasn't prepared for the shock that awaited him. As he turned, the person he had been yearning to see suddenly appeared before him. Why are you here? He stammered, extending a trembling hand towards the figure as if to confirm whether it was a dream or reality. Marrier's sharp voice interrupted the moment. Eureka, it's all worked out, she said. The realization hit John like a bolt of lightning. Eureka, the little squirrel, is the sister Marrier mentioned. His mind reeled as Marrier smirked, seizing the opportunity for revenge. We've just signed the divorce certificate, Marrier said with mock sweetness, and confirmed that it cannot be changed. John felt his heart sink as the weight of her words settled over him. Thank you for your accommodation, Mr. Hellard, Eureka added, her tone laced with formality. I would like to express my gratitude. So, could you stop for a moment? John hesitated, his mind racing. How did you become human? How did you end up as daughter of the Medster? His inner voice shaking. Eureka calmly explained everything to him. When she finished, John took a deep breath. I see. It's amazing that you managed to become human. I've wondered so many times where you were, whether you were doing well. Is life good for you? Eureka's expression softened slightly. I've thought the same about you. Our parting was too abrupt. I didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. But I'm truly happy to see you back safely. Looking at the girl's warm smile, John felt a sense of reality wash over him. She hasn't changed a bit, he thought. Not so long ago, he believed he was the only one who could see this smile, the only one who could help her become human. But now, she had other people in her life, family and friends who cared for her. "Who was that man you were with just now?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "His name is Renette," she replied. "He's Medster's attending physician and also my friend." John felt a wave of relief wash over him. Friend? Thank goodness he's not her fiancé. "Medster announced that I was adopted from an orphanage," she continued. "So, can you help me keep my origin a secret? The temple came looking for me before, and I can't risk them finding out." John nodded firmly. "Of course, I'd never reveal your true identity. And don't worry, I'll deal with the temple soon." But then his expression changed. "Wait, what's wrong with your face?" he asked, noticing her suddenly pale complexion. "I'm not sure," she murmured. "I feel fine, but something feels off." Before she could finish, her legs wobbled and her body collapsed. Her clothes fell limp around her as her ears twitched, and in an instant she was no longer a girl but a squirrel again. John stared in disbelief as the transformation unfolded before him. Both of them were equally confused, but Eureka was especially disoriented. "I've been human for 5 years. Why did I suddenly change back?" Trying to steady her thoughts, Eureka analyzed the situation. Could it be the medicine? The potion that was supposed to disrupt magic seemed harmless to ordinary people, but to someone like her, who relied on magic to stay human, it might have been catastrophic. As she tried to make sense of it all, a pair of large hands gently reached out toward her. John first touched her softly, then carefully scooped her up in his palms. "Furry ball," he said, his voice tender. "Why are you a squirrel again?" Eureka looked up at him, and for the first time, she noticed how much John had grown. His face, now much closer than before, was even more handsome than she remembered. His hands, far larger than they had been 5 years ago, held her securely. From her squirrel-sized perspective, it became clear just how much time had changed him. But she shook her tiny head. "I'm not Furry Ball," she said annoyingly. "My name is Eureka." John, however, didn't seem to understand about the name correction. "Do you need my magic to become human again?" he asked, his tone serious. "If that's the case, take it all. Whatever it takes. That's right. If I want to talk to him properly, I have to turn back into a human first," she realized. Eureka began absorbing the magic power John was transmitting to her. The magic filled her body almost instantly, alleviating her earlier worries that it might take another 50 days to gather enough. However, as the effects of the potion began to wear off, she realized something alarming. "If I turn back into a human now, I won't have any clothes on." Panicked, she leapt out of John's hands and headed toward where the clothes were kept. But before she could reach them, the transformation occurred. In an instant, the little squirrel turned back into a human, and John witnessed the transformation again, this time up close. Both of their faces turned crimson. Eureka shouted, "Don't look!" in a desperate attempt to salvage her dignity, but her scream alerted Heir and Renette, who were nearby the room. "I'm relieved the engagement was successfully terminated, but Hellard is even more arrogant than the rumors suggested. He's rude, too. And did you notice? Eureka didn't look well just now." Renette, looking uneasy, confessed, "There might have been an issue with the potion I gave her. I didn't expect it to have such miraculous and unpredictable effects." Their conversation was interrupted by Eureka's shout. Startled, they exchanged a look before rushing toward the source of the sound. "What's going on with Eureka?" Heir asked, her voice tinged with worry. Meanwhile, back in the room, John was frantically trying to help Eureka get dressed. "It's fine, sister, just wait a moment," Eureka called out, attempting to reassure Heir. She whispered urgently to John, "Hurry up!" But the more they tried, the more chaotic the situation became. John, usually calm even in the face of war, found himself fumbling and blushing furiously. "Just wait a little longer," he muttered, his hands trembling. He had never been this nervous, not even during battle. Outside the room, Heir suddenly froze. "Did you hear that?" she asked Renette. Renette nodded, equally startled. And Hillard's voice, it sounded flustered. That's not normal for him. "We should go in and check," Heir insisted. "What if something's wrong?" Renette agreed, and the two burst into the room, only to freeze at the scene before them. John stood to the side, his flushed face partially covered as he avoided their gaze. Eureka, meanwhile, was catching her breath, her face equally red. "Sister, Renette, what's the emergency?" Eureka asked, trying to sound composed. Heir and Renette exchanged baffled looks. "We were worried something happened," Heir exclaimed. "Are you okay? Why are you both so out of breath?" Panicked, Eureka quickly concocted an explanation. "Oh, it's nothing. The weather was so nice, so we just stepped out onto the balcony to enjoy some sun. Don't I look better already?" She flashed a nervous smile before pivoting the conversation. "By the way, Renette, could you prepare more of that medicine? The one that makes people look worse?" Renette frowned. It's not hard to make. But what do you need it for? I just thought I might need it later, Eureka said casually, brushing off the question. Well, if you're sure, I'll get it ready for you, Reinette replied with a shrug. Eureka quickly ushered them toward the door. You've confirmed I'm fine, so could you please step out now? John and I still have some business to discuss. Before they could protest, Eureka closed the door and locked it. Reinette, still puzzled, turned to Marrier. Master Hillard didn't look well either. He might need treatment too. Inside the room, John's mind was spinning. Seeing Eureka transform into a human again right in front of him had left him reeling. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to regain his composure. This is insane, he thought. I can't think about this right now. John, Eureka said softly, patting his arm. I'm sorry for scaring you. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. No, John replied, his voice still shaky. How did you turn back into a squirrel earlier? I don't know for sure, Eureka admitted, but I have a theory and I want to test it. Can you help me? Of course, John said without hesitation. What do you need me to do? You'll be attending an event at the temple soon, right? Eureka asked. Could you take me with you? I'll transform back into a squirrel and you can carry me in your arms. I need to observe something there. John nodded, though his mind remained clouded with questions and the weight of what had just happened. Ever since discovering that Eureka was the little squirrel he had cherished, John couldn't wait to move into the Duke's house. Meanwhile, Uncle Albert, worried that his nieces might suffer, traveled overnight from his territory to check on them. News of John Hillard's engagement dissolution with Medster was already making waves, filling the newspapers. Along the way, Albert overheard countless discussions about John. Rumors painted him as ruthless for imprisoning his foster mother and brother. The papers criticized him further, claiming he was indecisive as he had initially refused a celebratory banquet, only to later request it be reheld. Albert didn't care about the rumors. All that mattered to him was that his niece had managed to break off the engagement. However, as he flipped to the next page of the paper, his mood soured. There it was, a headline stating that the Duke of Hillard was making daily visits to Medster and meeting with the second daughter of Medster, Eureka. Albert was furious. What is he up to now, he thought. The engagement is over. Why is he looking for Eureka every day? Does he want to reinstate the engagement? Unbeknownst to Albert, John was indeed thinking about how to restore the marriage contract. Desperate, he even wondered if there might be magic to reverse time. The little squirrel, noticing his guilt-ridden expression, couldn't help but feel conflicted. Eureka brought up how, because of her, John had decided to reopen the celebration banquet, something he had initially refused to do. This decision led to people labeling him as someone who breaks promises. It doesn't matter, John muttered when confronted. Why doesn't it matter? Eureka asked, concerned. This misunderstanding doesn't bother me. His voice softened. Why do people always misunderstand someone so kind? Eureka thought. The celebration ceremony was scheduled for the following month, giving Eureka an opportunity. She planned to use the time to experiment with her transformations further. Meanwhile, the royal family had also announced a victory banquet, scheduled earlier than the temple's event. The timing wasn't coincidental. The temple held great influence within the empire, and the crown prince couldn't afford to let the temple monopolize the celebration. This was his chance to win over the war heroes and assert his authority. John's tone shifted to a nervous one. Eureka, he asked hesitantly, have you decided who you'll attend the banquet with? His cheeks reddened slightly, betraying the anticipation behind his question. He hoped, more than anything, for a favorable answer from his little squirrel. Well, I'm still thinking about it, Eureka replied. There are a few close candidates. John, already tense, gripped his teacup tightly. Close candidates? He thought, his mind racing. Who are these damn guys? Unexpectedly, Eureka pointed at him. The first candidate is you. The fierce expression on John's face softened instantly, transforming into one of surprise, like an eager puppy. Me? He stammered. Yes, you, Eureka said with a smile. It wouldn't be surprising if my sister attended with the crown prince. That would strengthen Medster's position. And since you're the protagonist of the banquet, if I attend as your significant other, the temple would think twice before acting against me. John's protective instincts kicked in immediately. If the temple is a concern for you, I'll take care of it. I'll uncover everything and ensure they can't harm you. Eureka, touched by his willingness to help, shook her head. I know you mean well, but that's not the solution. I still have things I need to confirm at the temple. If you deal with them entirely, I won't be able to investigate the truth. John frowned, clearly unhappy with her decision. Seeing his reluctance, Eureka repeated firmly, This isn't something you can handle by force. Trust me on this. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of rapid footsteps outside. Eureka stood abruptly, her ears twitching. That's my uncle's voice, she said. The door flew open the next moment, revealing an angry Albert storming in. That damn Hillard, he shouted. Is he bothering you again? His curses echoed down the corridor. Eureka couldn't help but secretly compare Albert's fiery temper to John's composed demeanor. Meanwhile, John's eyes narrowed in displeasure. The person you're talking about is standing right here, Eureka thought. As this moment, the temple was beginning to act just as expected. John's rise as a great magician had sparked their suspicion that Eureka might be the divine beast. They also realized that if John, as Hillard's heir, had removed the mark from the divine beast, it would have been effortless for him. However, the temple couldn't openly provoke a war hero, especially one protected by Medster. Eureka immediately rushed over to Albert. "Uncle, why are you here all of a sudden?" she asked, surprised. Upon hearing her refer to Albert as uncle, John suddenly realized his misunderstanding. He had mistakenly seen Albert as a potential rival. Composing himself quickly, he adjusted his emotions and introduced himself with a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is John Hellard." Albert froze. Isn't this the guy I just called a jerk? He thought, struggling to reconcile the calm man before him with his earlier assumptions. Meanwhile, John saw an opportunity. "I was wondering how to naturally bring up the engagement, but now the chance has delivered itself." John smiled warmly. "I wanted to explain everything to you personally." "So, you two already know each other?" Albert asked, still skeptical. "Yes," Eureka replied with a smile. "John helped me a great deal in the past, but we lost touch when he went to the battlefield. I'm happy to meet him again," John added. "And Eureka has been a great help to me as well. I'm grateful to her." Though slightly reassured, Albert couldn't shake his concern. "If it's all right, I'd like to ask about some things I read in the newspaper." "Of course," John replied with a magnanimous expression. "Ask anything you like." Albert looked at him carefully. "After the engagement was called off, a celebration party was scheduled. Is that correct?" Eureka wanted to reveal that John had arranged the celebration for her sake, but she couldn't disclose the truth about her identity as a divine beast. Before she could respond, John smoothly offered an explanation. "Yes, the celebration is to honor the soldiers for their dedication and service." Satisfied with the explanation, Albert nodded. "And this article?" he asked, pointing to another headline. "It says here that you imprisoned your stepmother and half-brother in a dungeon. According to dismissed servants, the Duchess even hired an attending doctor for you. Why would you do such a thing?" Eureka could feel the tension rising. She couldn't let John be misunderstood. "Uncle," she said firmly, "not everything you read in the newspapers is true. You shouldn't judge someone based on hearsay. I can tell you for certain, those claims are false. John is one of the kindest people I know." Albert studied John's expression carefully, and for the first time, he began to trust him. "I see," Albert said quietly. "I misjudged you. I owe you an apology for believing rumors and treating you unfairly." John shook his head. "There's no need to apologize. In fact, I should thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain." John suddenly noticed a book lying next to the newspapers on the table. It featured a portrait of Eureka on its cover. Curious, he leaned closer and realized it was part of Albert's collection of articles about Eureka. "Would you like to take a look?" Albert asked, gesturing toward the book. John leaned forward eagerly. "This is from Eureka's first visit to the nursery," Albert explained, flipping through the pages. Eureka sat there observing them, unable to shake the thought that they might unexpectedly get along quite well. As Eureka glanced at the table again, something else caught her eye. "Uncle, what's this?" she asked, pointing to a newspaper. "It's news from the East," Albert replied. "Prince Theodore is reportedly on his way to recuperate and has fallen in love at first sight with a woman, a noble from Eastern Nova named Rebecca Saves." Eureka's brow furrowed. In the original story, Theodore was the crown prince's half-brother, a man of immense ambition who ultimately betrayed both the crown prince and John. This new development, however, didn't align with the original plot. Why wasn't this part explained in the book? She wondered. "Are you interested in Prince Theodore's engagement?" Albert asked, watching Eureka's reaction closely. Eureka shook her head. "It's odd. I've never heard about the Saves family before." Albert nodded. "Neither have I. There hasn't been any news about Theodore's engagement in the capital. If this report is true, it's likely they'll announce the engagement at the upcoming banquet." Eureka stiffened. "If Theodore is the protagonist of the banquet and announces his engagement, my plans will be ruined." She sighed inwardly, realizing she had no choice but to narrow her focus to the remaining two candidates. Still, she decided to take a chance. Turning to John, she asked, "Will you be my partner for the celebration banquet? After all, you are the host, and our union could make a significant impact in the political sphere." Meanwhile, in another part of the empire, a red-haired woman had located Prince Theodore. "There you are, my fiancé," he said with a smile. Theodore's true target, however, was not her. It was Eureka. "So, has my little squirrel been found?" he asked, his voice soft yet dripping with veiled intent.